let's go ahead and start. The Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting has now commenced. It is August 4th at 4:07 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and to protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those of you who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you use only the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. So we'll go through roll call. Michael Edmonds.
I am present.
Olga Flores.
Present.
Sharia Jimenez.
Present.
Jim Toffel, I'm present. Liz Wilshin.
Present.
Jay Young.
Here.
Mindy Bernstein.
Here.
Lori Meserbo.
Present.
Joanne Carr. Joanna.
Present.
Ken Brianna Washington is absent. Maggie Amato Tejas. Maggie.
Present, sorry.
Oh, hey. Wendy Asher.
Present.
Marianne Bierling.
Present.
Mark Clark.
Yo.
Vicky Casino.
Here.
And our ex officio members are Marcos Ismail.
Here.
Betty Villegas.
Here.
Corin Manning. Corin's here.
Sorry, here.
And Liz Morales is out today. So, okay, Ann's gonna fill her shoes. Okay, so second agenda item is to review the meeting minutes, but since those meeting minutes have not been published, we can't do that. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 3, the call to audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed up to 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. So is there anybody who'd like to speak? Okay, a little surprised that with our agenda today, we don't have any speakers. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is a subcommittee update. So the first is the Housing Segregation Subcommittee. Jay, you've got the floor.
Hi, everybody. We did not meet at our last designated meeting time. Several of us were out of town, so nothing to report.
Okay, housing first. Liz.
Hey folks, so we did have an opportunity to meet. Our last meeting was pretty productive, I would say. We heard from a couple of program participants from Wildcat Inn, which is a outreach project that I believe is being headed by the Housing First program director, Brandy Champion, and she and her team are doing an excellent job of helping folks get screened into housing programs. We did hear from them saying that this is kind of the first success that a lot of them have experienced from getting off of the streets and having actual placement into housing opportunities. Some folks have been living on the street for 20 years or more. So we did discuss ways that their attempted participation has kind of experienced failure, and a lot of it seems to be a lack of follow through from a lot of the organizations based on what we heard. So I feel like a good opportunity for us to explore some more would be to hear from some of those contracted programs and what their caseloads are like, what the experience is for people who have been working there, both new and old employees, and seeing some opportunities for us to possibly review contracts and also see what we can do to support those programs a little bit more. We also discussed Housing First as an opportunity for tenants to participate a little bit more and have their voices heard in our subcommittee, and then also to report back to the full commission. We're looking at opportunities for denser development and how zoning restrictions can have an impact on that. And we did have a brief discussion on NIMBYism and opportunities that we see to either engage or move forward with the very strong NIMBY stronghold that is in Tucson. On that note, I did want to bring up, we didn't get an opportunity to discuss this at that meeting, but some more news has evolved on the NIMBY front, and it looks like, I don't know if anyone's heard of Joe Rogan. If you haven't, then I'm a little jealous, quite honestly. But Joe Rogan did encourage his listeners to take up firearms and use them against people living on the streets. After that podcast aired, someone did actually act on that, which is really devastating, but I thought it was relevant to our discussion, which was about how severely hostile people are in those NIMBY spaces. And that's
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Liz? Marianne?
Liz, we're an agency that administers the funds we get for homeless people coming out of the hotels and stuff. So I'm happy to give you the contact to my staff.
Thank you. That would be immensely appreciated, Marianne. I'll send you a message in our chat to get your email, just because I don't know that I have it saved.
Okay.
So the thought just crossed my mind. We've got 4 or 5 members who were moved from ex officio to voting members. Are all 5 of you on a subcommittee right now?
Yes.
Okay, everybody is. Okay, then I'll keep my mouth shut. Okay, any other questions for Liz? Okay, third is the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. Shay?
Hi, I will need your help too, Jim, because I know we got into the weeds in our last housing subcommittee meeting. We had an update on the IID with Corin, and then we had a really lengthy discussion about the LIHTC and the QAP requirements. And I remember us talking a lot about the zip code requirements, which actually, Jim, I just looked at the most recent version of the QAP and it looked like it got dropped. Those requirements, I don't know if that's the case.
The 85705 zip code got dropped?
No. It looked like they had eliminated that section altogether, but maybe I just was reading it wrong. But they right now they have I don't want to get too much into the details, but they have basically certain zip codes that you can't have projects in. And that works against Tucson for a lot of reasons. So we've got into details of that and just kind of basically the need to lobby. I think there's general consensus that we need to be present and lobbying actively the state legislature And then Jim, do you want to go into kind of the action items and next steps?
So, yeah, I mean, at the last Housing Commission meeting, we had all talked about making some recommendations. I think there was 3 recommendations we were gonna make to the city. And the feedback that this group gave the housing subcommittee was we needed to have more information on them. So as an example, we talked about funding the housing trust fund again for the city. And so the question came up, well, how is that going to get funded? Is that going to get funded through, additional taxes, or, it's just going to come out of the general fund? What are we recommending? And so that was, I think, the biggest thing that we were supposed to do, and it got sidetracked. It was a good discussion. So the housing forum, the housing conference for the state is coming up in 2 weeks. It's going to be at the Scott up in Phoenix. And there's usually a QAP feedback session that's part of that conference. And so we wanted to try to meet 2 times last month. We didn't quite get that together, but we want to come together kind of as a group and try to come up with recommendations to the state on changes that we think should be made to the QAP in order to help us get our fair share of tax credits. So, Tucson has roughly 14% of the state's population, and we've been getting about 6% of the tax credits. So we are not getting our fair share down here. And there's a number of reasons why. I think if there's about a half a dozen changes that we'd like to see get made to the QAP that would make Tucson more competitive. I think it's going to be important that we, come together as a community to try to help ensure that from the state perspective, we're getting as much down here as we can. I think that was kind of the high level gist of it, without going through all the specifics of the changes to the QAP. Marianne?
Is that part of the notes that hasn't been published yet, or can you send that out, Jim? The changes that we discussed?
Shay, did I send you my notes?
That's what I was looking for them right now, Jim. I couldn't find them, and it's not published on, I was looking for it as well. It's not published on the website.
Let me find, I'll send those to you, Marianne. I've got them.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item number 5, source of income protection. So HCD is submitting to Mayor and Council a proposal on source of income protection ordinance. The commission may or may not elect whether or not to support this ordinance, but Ann is going to give us a presentation on what they're planning.
Yeah. So hi everyone. So as Jim mentioned, Liz is out today at the Arizona National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, the NARO conference. So she had asked if I give an update and give a presentation on source of income. I did want to mention though, Terry Galligan is here. He oversees our public housing and Section 8 side of the house. And so I invite him to jump in at any point. And so I do have a presentation that, let me get up. All right. So when we're talking about source of income, I want to be clear that what we are talking about is protecting Tucsonans from discrimination based on source of income. So I'll provide some more information on that. And so you probably recall this has come up before on the commission. This was included as a strategy in the housing affordability strategy for Tucson. Strategy 3.2 talked about evaluating changes to the city's human relations ordinance, Tucson Code, Chapter 17. So on pages 29 and 30 of the HAST plan, there's a really succinct description of what it is we were to evaluate and why. And so the way it's written here, evaluate changes to the city's human relations ordinance code. I wanted to be really clear what that means. So our code right now already has a human service ordinance, and this is kind of the intro section to the ordinance. There is a policy declaration that the city, it is the policy of the city to eliminate prejudice and discrimination due to race, color, religion, ancestry, sex, age, disability, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, familial status, or marital status in places of public accommodation and employment and in housing. And so in terms of a source of income ordinance, what is being proposed is to add a few words to that description and then continue those words throughout the ordinance, and adding source of income as one of the areas to be protected against. And there we go. And so what does that mean? I realize that's not words people necessarily use every day. So what we are focusing on here is source of income discrimination refers to the practice of refusing to rent to a housing applicant because of the person's lawful form of income. I'm not going to read the whole area in orange, but please note in the proposed ordinance, which is now online, there is a definition section in the ordinance, and this orange area here is directly taken from what is being proposed. That is the definition of source of income. So any sort of lawful source of income is what we're referring to when we talk about source of income. And so Mayor and Council directed us to evaluate this, and my understanding is looking at it in a couple different ways. One is that somebody shouldn't be discriminated against for if they are a veteran, if they are low income and have a Section 8 voucher. So really this is about protecting and fairness. And it's also looking at the housing crisis we're in right now. And so these are stats. This is from the city. This doesn't include our nonprofits that have housing opportunities. This is talking about our Section 8 program here. This is a few months old at this point. This is something we need to update in the next few weeks. But one of the biggest challenges we're having right now is we have our landlords. We know that in the past, there were some issues with the Section 8 program and some landlords chose to leave. Since then, we have really improved the performance of our Section 8 program, and I'll go into that in a minute. But what we're finding is we are having a really tough time retaining landlords in the current market, and we're not having new landlords opt in. And so what's happening is even people that have vouchers aren't able to find units at the current moment. And so it's really one of the goals here is to try to make it easier for anyone, regardless of their source of income, to be able to find a place to live. And so as part of the HAST plan, Mayor and Council asked us to evaluate this over the past several months. There's been an interdepartmental effort to draft the ordinance language that included a lot of folks on it from our city attorney's office. One of the things I'll mention in doing some background, Tucson is not, this is not new for many cities or states across the nation. Last I looked, there was over 20 states that have a statewide source of income ordinance protecting people here. And then there's over 100 local ordinances between cities and counties nationwide. So this is not something new that the city is proposing that hasn't been done in a lot of other places. We have created a website recently. This is in thinking about how to show a draft of the ordinance and what is being proposed, and really thinking about trying to get some public comment. And so I'll show that in a moment. And then we do have 2 upcoming public meetings. One is online and one is in person, really wanting to hear thoughts on the proposed ordinance, and then also thoughts on the implementation should mayor and council choose to approve this ordinance. At the current moment, and of course things change quickly around here, but at the current moment, the plan is to take this ordinance to mayor and council in their second meeting in September. I think it's going to be hard for me. I might try when I'm done to go back to show you exactly what's on the website, because I want to make sure everyone knows where to find information. But this is, we do now have a website. I'll get there in a second, where you can read the draft ordinance, a red line version. Essentially, it's amending our existing human service ordinance. So you'll see exactly what we're proposing be added. And there, so you can see up at the top, there is the ordinance itself. You can view it in different ways. There's a link to participation, and there you can sign up for either of the public meetings. We are asking people to register. In particular, the in-person, we want to make sure we cap it given COVID and all of those concerns. And then we also, there is a FAQ section, and I really recommend going through the FAQ section. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what is being proposed and how it will impact landlords. And so we really, based on concerns we've heard to date, really have tried to outline what from our attorneys would change and would not change. And so these are just a few at the top. You know, one of the questions we're getting is, will I be required to lower my rent? Will I be required, if somebody can't afford, they have a voucher and they can't afford, will I be required to lower my rent? No, this is landlords set their rent. If the voucher is not, cannot cover the gap between the voucher and the unit, that is, then the voucher holder is not able to rent the unit. So that is a question we often get. Will I be required? And so the answer there is property owners and managers still, you can have set screening criteria that is lawful. And so if there is criteria that you have set that is lawful and the Section 8 voucher does not meet, no, you are not required to rent to that Section 8 voucher holder. Other questions, and I'll turn to that page when I'm finished wrapping up this presentation. Couple other things, you know, in terms of what we've heard, the biggest concern we've heard is performance of the Section 8 program and really thinking about adding additional burden to landlords. And so a few things, just, I know we've talked about this before in this group, but in the past, we've heard a lot of concerns about the inspection time, and just want to say that the inspection time at this point is down to a 4-day turnaround. And one thing that I know that there's concern about the inspection process, but we've also heard a lot of landlords that participate in the program really like having a formal process of inspection. It really makes it consistent and clear for their, and they have tenants that are complaining, you know, that the inspection process makes it clear to them. And so interesting, some people are concerned. A lot of people we actually hear really feel like the inspection process is really helpful for them in knowing exactly what they have to do to meet the standards for the apartment. In terms of, we've heard concerns about payment. And so it's always the very first payment. That's the question. Once you're set up, you get that monthly payment. And so at this point, the landlords get their first housing payment within 15 days of the contract execution. That used
No,
to be
but-
quite a bit longer, and that's down to 15 days. And then one of the things, and honestly, I wish he was here today, he will be available for the public meetings. We have a new landlord support team, and his team is getting bolstered with folks to really help landlords in this process of navigating the Section 8 requirements. And so I mentioned there will be a couple opportunities coming up, public meetings where Liz will be doing a much better version of this presentation. She'll be able to provide a lot more information. And there'll be some other staff on hand, the attorneys that have been working with us, and also some of the folks from the landlord team. And so the one thing before I turn it over, I do want to also hopefully navigate to the website and just give a quick overview of what is on the website, and I had it up. Okay. Okay, so in terms of the website, and we'll put, if you haven't already, Elson, do you mind putting the link to this in the chat? So the main page at the top is just the information on the meetings coming up. Want to make sure everyone knows that. There is a section where you can click on or the clean version or the red line version, or up here you can actually see it if for some reason your computer won't let you download. We have it in the box there. There is an overview of what's being considered and some of the information I heard today. This is information on source of income from other states, and then information linking it back to the HAST plan. Participation, I mentioned there's 2 public meetings coming up. There's also a very, very short survey. And that survey really gives a comment box so that people, if people want to provide comments on the proposed ordinance or on the implementation of the proposed ordinance, they can do that via the survey. And then I mentioned the frequently asked questions. As we're getting questions and doing outreach, we will be adding to this. One of the things too, I know that there has been opposition on this, and want to mention that we are working with the Arizona Multifamily Housing Association and Tucson Association of Realtors, has been meeting with them and will be meeting with them this upcoming week, trying to address concerns. And at the end of the day, this is something where I think there will not be agreement in the community on, and something that we think can be helpful in terms of addressing some of the challenges. So that's our overview. I'm happy to attempt to answer questions, and we'll invite Terry to do that with me, but interested in hearing thoughts from you all.
Jim, you're on mute.
Oh, go ahead, Marianne.
So we just, in a program we're funded by HUD funds through the city, where we were paying the rent, the landlord accepted that. The minute we got an HPP voucher for her, he's told us he would not renew her and he's not going to accept the voucher. So I had a pretty lively discussion with this person. One of the first things he said was, Section 8 is not a source of income. A source of income is an income that a person gets, like through SSI, SSDI working. Section 8 is a source of rental assistance. And I said, okay, fine, you know. But the concern too that I've heard from other landlords about this is that if the voucher is paying 100% of the rent because the person has no income, how do they pay for other things? A lot of them are, are concerned that people live without enough food. They don't have personal care items. They don't have, any other money. And so that's just some of the discussions I've had with people. But a lot of them I had to explain that, yeah, Section 8 really isn't a source of income. You're right, it's rental assistance. And then the source of income becomes a whole different discussion with them regarding no income. One question I have for you, Anne, is in the question, the FAQ, where am I required to accept the vouchers? And, you know, it says would be expected to rent to somebody. So if they meet the screening criteria, you're expected to rent, but does that mean it's required?
So you cannot deny tenancy based on source of income alone. So if somebody comes to you, you don't have other people that have come to you, yes, you are expected to rent to them. That said, if they don't meet your other screening criteria, then you would not have to rent to them. If you get a couple people at the same time come to you, as the Section 8 voucher, one doesn't, you don't have to take the one with the Section 8 voucher, but you cannot deny tenancy based on the voucher alone.
Well, I didn't win that argument with him so far.
You did or did not?
Did not. Still working on it.
And I mean, there is no source of income protection today in terms of,
I know.
of how
I
it
know,
works.
and
So,
for her to lose her residency after being there for so long and being a good tenant. So we're looking at we're looking legally, into some legal responses to this now.
Is that very common where somebody is a tenant and they get a Section 8 voucher, and then seems like the issue is more because people have vouchers and
No, I've not heard about this happening yet. This is the first one that I've heard from us, and we work with probably about 500 households. So it's all new to me.
all right, so I don't know who raised their hand first, but I'm gonna call on Joanna.
Yeah, thank you. So just some comments. I'm definitely hugely a proponent of source of income discrimination protection law, and it's really great to see Tucson leading the way with this in local municipal policy. And the reason I believe this is so important is because housing programs that exist that are intended to address homelessness and intended as an affordable housing solution, like Section 8, are simply not working within the current housing market. And the lack of source of income discrimination protection at present is a contributing factor really to the levels of homelessness and housing instability. And so I think that this policy is critical. We do have to be really aware of the opposition from the landlord side, and certainly that we need to make sure that housing programs are working for landlords too, for this to work. And it sounds like a lot of work has been done by Tucson, especially on the Section 8 program. The risk too, and this is something I'm always concerned about with this, is preemption at the state law level. And because landlord advocates have so much power at the state legislature, I just think it's always something we have to be really careful of, because what we don't want is a preemption bill that will prevent any municipality from doing this, because that would be really hard to reverse. So I think it's very important, even being a real supporter of this, is to make sure that that work continues to really engage the landlord community. And it sounds like your team has been doing that and has done a great job. But I just kind of want to point that out as a real risk when the state legislature rolls around. And then I also have a question, because I know we've spoken a lot about Section 8, but this ordinance isn't limited to Section 8, correct? It would be like rapid rehousing, hood bash.
Correct. I put
Okay.
for Marianne's comment that a voucher wouldn't be considered. I thought it would be helpful to put the definition in the chat to show. And so that is exactly, tried to be as inclusive as possible and leave leave it so that anything that is a lawful source of income could be included under that, including veterans benefits, etc.
Thank you so much.
And I appreciate, one thing I'll say, Joanna, too, I appreciate that. And well, we have made strides, and Terry, feel free to jump in here at any time with the Section 8 program, still really working on improving the experience for landlords, working on a better portal for landlords. I think that that's something that will be important and really open to feedback on what is most important to focus on and try to prioritize there.
Thank you.
Vicky?
I had a couple of comments. I also am really glad Tucson is taking a lead on this. When I first looked at the language on the website, my initial reaction is that it favors landlords, but I understand based on what Joanna just explained, we need to have them on board. I think that there's a lot of discrimination, and I don't know that all the landlords who are doing it even realize that they're doing it. So I think that there's this other separate education component that needs to happen. The other thing I just wanted to say, I'm really glad the website looks so much more user-friendly than previously. My one concern, and I'm not sure who I need to talk to, is there are some accessibility issues with it. So I don't know if I need to give those to you or somebody in your IT department. There are things like some of the buttons don't have, the action buttons don't have alternative text. Some of the images don't. There are redundant links, like the link to register for a live session and register for an in-person session have exactly the same language, and each link needs to have distinctive text. So there are a lot of things like that that can really interfere with anybody who is using a screen reader as well as some other assistive technology.
Vicky, I appreciate that. How about, and Allison, do you mind? Let's make sure we try to get a meeting with Vicky ASAP to try to get that corrected. She's giving the thumbs up.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Wendy, yeah, sure.
Thanks. So a couple of comments. One is Marianne was talking about landlords saying, well, you know, if somebody doesn't have any income, how are they going to meet their other needs? You know, that is just a false argument on the landlord's part, because they're never going to meet their needs if they're living in the wash. The other piece is that we at Legal Aid, and I'm not here representing Legal Aid, but I'm a managing attorney here at Southern Arizona Legal Aid. So I see a lot of landlord-tenant issues come across our desks and with our applicants and clients. And we see enough situations where somebody was a current tenant and then received a voucher, and the landlord then won't accept the voucher and won't renew their lease. That's a clear case that this proposed ordinance would protect. The other issue is that there's a misconception that people who are on Section 8 have no other source of income. Many folks on Section 8 are working or have income from disability or other benefits. And so that's another piece that needs to be made clear for landlords, is that just because somebody gets Section 8 does not mean they have no income. So I just want to make sure that all of that kind of background information is the noise that you all are hearing, as well as landlords, when you're talking to them about this proposed ordinance. Thanks.
Betty?
I just want to add to what's already been said, because a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but a couple of things. When someone doesn't have any income and you wonder how are they paying for certain things. You can rest assured that the intake Section 8 specialist is addressing those issues before they even get to the voucher. There are safeguards in place where the specialist has to ask those questions and they have to document their answers. And they sign a lot of anti-fraud paperwork. So, there's safeguards in place for those things with Section 8. So I was thinking that, I like that Anne put the definition of income, source of income in there, but really it's source of rental payment, right? It doesn't matter where the source of rental payment comes from, or it shouldn't matter, as long as it can be verified that there is either no income or and they don't get Section 8, or if they have other income that's not unverifiable. But at least Section 8, you can verify that income, you can verify that rental payment as well. So, and thank you, City of Tucson, for stepping up to this. I'm really, really excited about this. And I'm sure South Tucson will follow once you get it all done.
Jay?
Yeah, first of all, I fully support this. Like others have said, it's absolutely critical. I mean, it's a clear equity issue. Obviously we all agree that, there are always going to be landlords. People are always going to rent. Not all landlords are bad. That kind of thing. I think you kind of hear a lot of that these days, which I don't really agree with. So I just want to say that up front. But, a lot of the concerns that I have heard, just from my point of view, are not really legitimate. I mean, there's very little about this ordinance, I think, as it is, that is going to make it at all difficult for landlords or, prevent them from making a profit or, doing what they need to do to maintain their properties, which, landlords have to do. So, I think a lot of the critiques that I've heard are coming from misunderstanding of landlords. I mean, if I understand this correctly, right, if you have a pool of 10 applicants for an apartment and one of them has a Section 8 voucher, it doesn't mean that that person then gets preference. You would, just as you do any other, selection process, you're looking at all of the various characteristics of tenants, how much money they make, all of the different things that landlords do to screen. So, the fact that somebody has a voucher does not automatically put them to the top of the list, which I think is, there's this idea that landlords are going to be forced to take Section 8, which is totally not true. So I just want to make sure that, we as a community, and particularly this group, this commission, pushes back against those, what I consider to be false concerns that have nothing to do with the actual ordinance. And I think it's critical for us as a group, as a commission, to voice our support however we want to do that, to mayor and council, and just to the community at large. I think it's laid out very clearly. And, if there are legitimate concerns, then, let's address them. Obviously, landlords are critical to the housing supply and for people being housed. So, those concerns need to be addressed. But so that's my my 2 cents there. I guess I do have a question though. So if a landlord has not previously accepted a Section 8 tenant for whatever reason, and a tenant applies to a unit and the landlord wants to take that voucher, is there anything special that has to be done, or the landlord just goes through the normal process? I will accept you as a tenant, the lease gets signed, and then somebody comes out to inspect the unit? Is that basically all that needs to happen? I guess, is there actually, because that again doesn't really sound like a major hurdle. It sounds like an extra step, but it doesn't really sound like a hurdle. So I'm just curious, a landlord that's never participated and all of a sudden is presented with someone who has a voucher, what are the steps that landlord has to take?
And Terry, I'm gonna punt this one to you. I do have some clarity, but I think you can explain this process better.
Yeah, this is Terry Galligan, Deputy Director at Housing and Community Development. There's no difference. It's someone who's a new landlord. They'll have to go through the process of getting signed up. But as far as with this new ordinance or anything, there's nothing that changes with that. There's as far as the process.
Well, Terry, I also mean kind of irregardless of this ordinance, if there is a voucher holder who approaches a landlord who's never taken a voucher before, what does that sign-up process look like for the landlord? And then, what does the inspection process, like, what does that actually look like? So let's say, I have an apartment for rent, a voucher holder approaches me about renting it. I want to rent to them and I say, okay, tenant, future tenant, I would like to rent to you. From that point, what happens between the landlord and the tenant, and particularly, what does the landlord have to do from that point?
Yeah, we do have an actual voucher that's given to the landlord or property manager management company. They do have to fill that out and return that to us. And then we make sure that it meets what we call the rent reasonableness, which basically means, we have maximum rents for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms, etc. So once we've screened that, then we can have the landlord and the tenant sign a lease. We do have the inspection process, like Ann said earlier, that once we get the paperwork in, we can get that scheduled very quickly within 4 days. So it's not a cumbersome process. It's a little bit of extra paperwork. One extra step is the required HUD housing quality standards inspection that we send out our inspectors to do. So it's pretty much the same process that any landlord would go through with their own background screening and things like that. But it's a relatively painless and quick process.
Hey, Terry, I'm going to jump in here for a second. And so from a financial perspective, how quickly are payments processed to landlords for the rent? And then does it include like a damage deposit, or is that the responsibility of the tenant still?
Yeah, like we said, when the initial contract is signed, lease is signed, we've been averaging about 15 days to get that first payment out. It's usually prorated unless they start at the first of the month. And then our payments go out typically between the 1st and 3rd of every month. So it's just like you would expect from your tenant that, you have the first couple days of the month to pay. And as far as the damages and things like that, that is something that on certain programs we have with the city that we can help cover those application fees, the deposit fees, and damage fees. We can actually pay that out, and most landlords do request that, and we're able to cover that for most of our tenants.
Jay, anything else?
No, I think that's it for me, Jim. Appreciate it.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm just, let me start by saying this is not a partisan comment, but preemption is absolutely a huge concern. And if we want that not to happen, then we need to tell everybody they need to vote because that's entirely controlled by the legislature and the makeup of the legislature. This is an election where I think there's, it's going to be a new legislature because of so many changes as a result of redistricting. And I think it's an opportunity for people to really have an impact, and we need to tell them that, because the reality is there will be a huge well-funded initiative, campaign oriented toward trying to preempt this. I just know that as well as I know it's, 456. So that's enough.
All right, Maggie?
So as we're now a Section 8 landlord, I guess, for some properties that we inherited. But previous to that, we're talking a lot about Section 8, but we also have a little fourplex that we got into contract with the Arizona, was used to be Simpatico. Anyways, we received access funds, and so we're committed to providing affordable housing to the SMI community. So, and that's like a whole other thing. What I am saying though is I do think that we don't have to. We're a nonprofit, and our purpose, and I totally support this this ordinance. I think it's absolutely necessary. But to Joanna's point, I really think that we do need to include tenants because, they're in our situation with our little fourplex, we have 4 little units and we had, very volatile tenants in there. The case management isn't always there to identify, do they have other sources? So an example, and maybe it's the extreme, but, we were dealing with access, their purpose was to get homeless people out from under the bridges, and then they would put them in our housing, and they had no other source of income. So then they started to do some illegal stuff. And, it was pretty devastating for the first, year. And we were first couple of years, it was like, oh my goodness, there was damage, there was this, and I'm not blackballing, I'm not trying to scapegoat or stereotype anybody, but I really truly believe that it had to do with the case management or lack thereof with that. And the whole idea of, how do you put a person who is homeless into a situation? Yes, their rent is taken care of, but how are they going to be fed? And there's real consequences to that. So, and then now we do have Section 8, and it's all great. We have a property manager, so I don't have to really deal with it. But for instance, we get a letter from the city stating that next month, so-and-so tenant no longer will receive Section 8. Like, it's a 30-day notice, not even. And so we're like, what? So those are types of, I think that kind of communication is really, really important, because if you have someone who's receiving, say 100%, they're paying, and then all of a sudden you get a letter, how are they going to make the rent next month? So I do really think that including the tenant and maybe identifying some of these concerns, so Section 8, I think has a lot more staff involved than maybe some of the other rental assistance programs. And so that's just my 2 cents from living this.
Yeah.
So.
Shay?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I want to go through this process myself, so I'm interested to see how long it'll take. But when I looked at the application, I was like, whoa, it's pretty beefy, right? And for someone who's not a professional landlord, and again, just some of the smaller mom and pops, I think overall, though, I will say I'm definitely in support of this. I think it's really important. I think it, like everyone has mentioned, I think it strikes a good balance between still letting landlords do what they need to do, but I think the end result for me is just that at the end of the day, what this really does is it gives people legal power in court, basically, right? At the end of the day, if you feel you were denied because of this discrimination, now you have the power to take the landlord to court. That's really what this does, right? It helps give maybe a little more balance of power to the tenant that they didn't otherwise have before. That's how I see end results, how this will actually end up helping anyone, is that you have legal standing in court. Is that kind of correct, how I'm seeing it?
I think so. And do you know the answer to that?
It was just as Wendy had to jump off. I was hoping the attorney would comment on that. I think that is one thing. I think it's a policy statement. I think it's a commitment to equity. And one thing too is Jay mentioned this, and I want to reiterate just the importance of our landlord community in terms of what they do provide and the housing they do provide. So I think that is something that can't be understated in this whole conversation.
Liz?
So I wanted to ask, first of all, Jay, if this were to be enacted, would people be able to report this as a fair housing violation and would it get investigated?
I don't know that there are enforcement provisions in the ordinance. I can tell you that the City of Tucson's fair housing ordinance that includes extra protected classes that the state act and the federal act do not include. The city basically theoretically handles those complaints, and the enforcement, the penalties are not very high. So, and I know that the city doesn't do a lot with its fair housing ordinance now. So I think that that is definitely an issue. You know, if there's a strong enforcement mechanism, obviously it's a stronger deterrent. If it's more of a policy statement, then it's more of a policy statement. So the answer to your question is basically yes. If somebody came to us with the source of income discrimination complaint, we would certainly investigate it and do whatever we could to help enforce that and work through the city's process. But having been doing this for many years now, we've never gone through the city's process because it's not very strongly enforced. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Jay. It does. So then my question is, if we are potentially putting ourselves at risks of preemptive action from the state legislature, why are we doing this if there are no consequences for people who violate it?
And I'm happy to jump in here. And there is, the last FAQ does talk about enforcement. So a couple things from my perspective. One is really hoping to do a better job of educating on source of income and trying to help address the misconceptions that are out there. A second thing is, I think as we're all learning what's working and not working, I think that there's more information now on enforcing the fair housing ordinance that exists and what this would look like. And so one of my tasks that Liz asked me to do yesterday is setting up a meeting with our office that does the enforcement and a few other people, our attorney's office, on looking at bolstering that a bit so that there is more protection there overall. So we are looking at the enforcement now, and these are comments that I really appreciate as we consider, as mayor and council consider this, thinking about how we can make improvements so that this would be effective and really be equitable.
I just would like to give the comment that as someone who has unfortunately been against real estate organizations for something that I didn't think even pertained to them in terms of advocacy, I really would hate for us to shoot ourselves in the foot with something that's not effective in terms of protecting our tenants and people who receive Section 8. And I would rather do it well rather than do it just for the sake of doing it.
Ray, you have something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on an earlier question about what is required of landlords. My understanding is there are requirements like if your gas stove doesn't light without a lighter, that can't accept a Section 8 voucher. So I was wondering, like, I know Jay, I was hearing this question from you about, but what are the requirements? And that's where I'm still caught up is like, are there more barriers at that inspection, and then what the support will be? Are landlords then expected to make those improvements? Do they have to start billing all of the utilities in with the rent? Yeah, just I don't think I got a full answer to Jay's question and wanted some more specifics on that.
Yeah, this is Terry Galligan again. It is we call it a housing quality standards inspection. And things like you mentioned, like doors have to shut, stoves have to work, water has to flow. Those are all part of the inspection process. I think it'd probably be more appropriate, and for the sake of time, I can share that with you and the commission offline, because it is quite a long, extensive list in the process. So I'd be glad to share that. But just be assured that if we do fail quite a few apartments when we go out and look at them because of health and safety issues. It's the standard things that you would expect when anybody's moving into a new apartment, that the toilet flushes, the stove turns on, that you're not lighting the stove with a cigarette lighter, et cetera. So those are all things that I can share with you.
I guess then my question is, what happens if they don't? Like, I live in a house, my stove is never going to light without a cigarette lighter. Do you require then the landlord to
It
do
is
that?
required, yeah. It is required, and if the landlord is not willing to do that or able to do that, then we issue a new voucher to the tenant, and they're able to go and look for another unit. And that does happen, not very often. If there's a situation where someone's living in a unit and they're having issues with their landlord of not fixing a refrigerator, a stove, or a toilet, they can ask for a special inspection. We'll send out our inspection crew to do a special inspection, and if it fails, the landlord has 24 hours to fix that if it's a serious health and safety issue.
Thank you.
All right, Jay.
Yeah, there were just two other things that, as we've been talking, that I wanted to address. I mean, this idea of Section 8 tenants who don't have other income. Again, any landlord, I think, who is got a pool of tenants, potential tenants that they're looking at, it's very common for landlords to look at how much income people make, 2 times, 3 times the rent. So again, if you're looking at a pool of candidates and you've got 3 folks who, have 2 times the rent or 3 times the rent in income versus someone who's got no income, again, I think this ordinance still allows you to weigh those different factors about tenants that you're looking at. So, obviously, if you're looking at somebody and you think them having no other income is a barrier to them living in your unit, that I think as a landlord is something you could use to weed out tenants. If people think I'm wrong about that, I'd love to know. And people lose jobs all the time, right? I mean, the tenants who are not on Section 8 are relying on income from jobs that they have that can be lost at any moment as well. So, might be halfway through a month, and that's not dissimilar from a Section 8 tenant all of a sudden not having a voucher in 30 days. So again, I think a lot of these things, though are true, are similar to the way things work normally with folks who don't have vouchers. So I just want to put that out there. I think, a lot of the issues that come up, while they're true with Section 8 voucher holders, they're also true with tenants who are relying on income from jobs. So, I think there are a lot of equivalents there that people don't see, which are, again, important to point out. I am also glad we brought up enforcement, because I do think it is critical to look at this enforcement piece. And I do know that HCD is looking at it. And, obviously as having a job that deals with fair housing, I'm glad that it's kind of opened up the discussion about the city's I forget what the ordinance, the city's fair housing ordinance. And it could be an opportunity to bolster enforcement of the city's other protected classes as well. So while enforcement is important, and I do think that there needs to be as strong an enforcement mechanism as possible, even if it's not very strong, I still think it's critically important to pass this. I do not think that preemption or the threat of it should influence us from not doing this. I mean, the state's going to do what the state's going to do. We don't know that they're going to do it. We never, you just don't know. Probably it's going to happen, but to me, that's not a reason not to do something. So, again, just having this discussion, having this on the table, we're having a lot more conversation about Section 8. We're having a lot more discussion about poverty, what it means to be low income and rent in this community. So, there's already been a lot of positive that's come out, in my opinion, of looking at this ordinance at all. So again, the stronger the enforcement, the better. But regardless of where the enforcement falls, I still think it's a critically important thing for the city to pass and for us to support.
Mary Ann?
So I just want to say thank you to Maggie. She was a lot more brave than I was in terms of talking about the no income piece. But I also think that we need to have a separate conversation on people who are seriously mentally ill, and how their case managed in apartments in the community. We've just experienced $6,000 worth of damage from somebody who was placed, is the word, by an agency in our apartments, and they flooded it because they were off their meds, but there's no case management. And we have talked about this for years. And I think it's well past the time that there's a separate discussion on this, especially for landlords, because there are people who have co-occurring disorders who do get vouchers and assistance from agencies. But if that case management is lacking and these folks are neglected, it is a huge problem for a landlord. And we've experienced it more than once. So if we could put this on an agenda for some subcommittee, I think this discussion is one that also has to take place. That's all I got. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna recognize myself.
If I could just add one thing, this is Terry Galligan.
Go ahead, Terry.
First, I just want to say that, the vast majority of our voucher holders are not from our housing preference program. The vast majority are just working families, elderly, some disabled that have funds. So, but I 100% agree with Mary Ann and Maggie that we do need to do better with our housing preference program or homeless programs. And we're glad that we now have the Housing First Program Director, Brandy Champion, and her partnership with with a lot of these agencies. So I think that would be a great idea to follow up and see how we can better manage and better support our landlords and our tenants who are in the housing preference program. So thank you.
So Michael Edmonds and I attended the last mayor and council meeting. Maybe it was two meetings ago, after our last commission meeting. And, we did it because they were talking about the parking reduction for affordable housing. And they were on the consent agenda was to keep this commission going. So I felt like it was important to be there. And another thing that was on the agenda was the eviction moratorium for public housing. And I was shocked at the reaction and everybody who came out. So there was probably 100 people outside the meeting protesting prior to the meeting. And during the call to audience, there was person after person after person talking about housing affordability issues. And some of these individuals had really, awful stories of things that had happened to them where they've applied to 10 different complexes and not been accepted and had to pay a $100 fee each time. So they're out $1,000 and they still don't have a place to live. So, I think this issue with people not being able to use the vouchers is kind of a subset of a bigger issue that we have right now in the city, which is we have a huge housing shortage. I saw a report a couple days ago that had vacancies, national vacancies by state. And as a state, for the state of Arizona, our vacancies are about 5.7%. There's an error margin 2% there. So don't know exactly what it is, but what I'm hearing right now in the city of Tucson is we have a vacancy of 3%, which is the minimum you need for turns. So it takes time when a person moves out to get the unit ready for the next tenant. So, you know, my kids are getting to the age where they're starting to look for an apartment and they can't find a place to live. And so there's, you know, what's happening right now is, you know, I agree it's an issue with this source of income and discrimination, but it's really a subset of a bigger issue, which is we need more housing. And my only concern with this is I don't think anybody's going to look at it and say, well, you know, I would have built this project, but now that there's a source of income discrimination, I think I'm going to take a pass. I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't think this is going to affect our housing stock. I don't think it's going to solve the issue either, though. So I'm kind of rambling on here. I had another thought. I forgot what it was. So, you know, one of the things that was asked of us today is to either, you know, make a motion of support or not for mayor and council. It's going to be voted on at the September meeting. So what I'd like to do is just go through these next 4 comments, and then let's talk about if we want to take action on this or not as a group. So Liz.
Yeah, Jim, first of all, really good points. I, as someone who did do case management for several years, the cost of applications can oftentimes exceed the cost of even a deposit. So I agree. I think that would be a great next topic for us to begin to address, is possibly requiring a cap on application fees. I know people who have paid $200 in application fees now. But as for some other points that were raised by Maggie and Marianne, the Housing First Subcommittee is a great space for you to be welcome to come and discuss some of your concerns. Like I said, our future agenda items do include trying to reach out to those case managers and hear what supports they're lacking, because I'm sure you mostly see their faces and don't really see and hear from the organizational structures that are or are not supporting them. As for Ray's question regarding HQS inspections, I can say that I did sometimes successfully locate property managers or landlords for a property, and the landlords or property managers would withdraw during the HQS inspection process, either because it would take enough time to get the HQS inspection scheduled in the first place, that it ended up being a loss of income for them in some way. And there were other tenants who were able to move in more readily. Also, like mentioned previously, if that HQS inspection fails the first time, I had at one point during the first year of COVID, someone's unit get inspected 5 times by a landlord that has been renting to Section 8 and other contracted organizations for years. And that person didn't get into their apartment for 3 months. So I think it's significant. Like Jim mentioned, this is a symptom of a bigger issue. And when a landlord is able to do something as small as raise the cost of rent by $1 so that it excludes someone who has that voucher, I kind of wonder whether the remedy might be something else in addition to this. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm finished.
Sorry, Joe, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Jim. Addressing a couple of things Liz brought up. Somebody told me that capping fees on rental applications is a violation of the state preemption on rent control. And I'm not sure if that's true or not, but if that is, I think capping those is a great idea, but you have to take on rent control at the state level to do it. Going on about the state level, conversations around preempting tenant protections happen every legislative session now. That's going to happen in the next one, whether we pass this or not. I think the way to make this better would be to have a statewide source of income discrimination protection at a state level, like many other states do. But it would be great. Sometimes you need a city to lead the way on that. And if Tucson does it, I think that's really great. And speaking of states as well, Georgetown Public Policy Review had a nice paper a couple of years ago, percentage of housing choice voucher units by state. All the highest percentages are states that have statewide SOI protection. Arizona is the lowest in the country, and it's about 26% of the highest, which is Massachusetts. So the law probably isn't going to solve everything, but these have been proven protections that work well in other areas, even controlled for a lot of other factors. I hope we do recommend this. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Hey, CJ, did you have something you wanted to say? Or are you good?
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to just kind of ask a little bit. I heard Liz's comment earlier, and Jay sort of addressed it, but my concern was about whether there is anything that's worse off. It doesn't seem like there is to me. I mean, regarding the enforcement, my understanding is that it's very, very difficult to enforce something like this, and just not specifically this, but that in general, housing discrimination, it's really only the landlords that don't know that it's illegal, that are likely to get caught doing it, and that it's not, and that if you know how to do it well, it's very easy to get away with. But I still feel like this is something that's very worth passing, again, more as a policy statement. I don't think there's any assumption here that this is going to fix the housing crisis or anything like that, but it just addressing the large numbers of folks who have vouchers and can't find places, that this will increase it somewhat. It's not going to fix the whole problem, but I guess just all that is to say, I don't think, as Jay said, that the threat of preemption is a reason not to do it, but I understand that in some cases what we have is sort of better than what we would have after a preemption. I don't think that's the case here. We don't have any protections against it. So if they preempt it, they undo what we did, but I don't think that leaves us better or worse off. That's my understanding. If anyone has, something to say against that.
All right, thank you, CJ. Mark?
So let me start off by saying I support the mayor and council moving forward with this ordinance. A couple of other quick comments I want to make. I think I'm disconcerted about comments about people with serious mental illness, and whether they do or don't more frequently than the general marketplace make significant damage to housing units. It sounds like it's probably a good opportunity to have another conversation about housing first. And as a former CEO at Kodak Behavioral Health Services, I certainly understand the challenges of the case management system. So that's the first thing. The other thing I just want to say is understand what appears to be a big supply problem. I think what we have is a catastrophic failure of the private market to actually meet the needs of people who find themselves not able to function in the private market. I talk to older adults every day who are being essentially evicted or not having their leases renewed because a landlord a new owner has acquired their apartment complex, and they're jacking their rents up by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I don't know how we're going to get ourselves out of this. It certainly appears to me that some sort of public ownership model, we're going to need to move more toward a more aggressive public ownership model, simply because there's no way to manage the rent increases which landlords are throwing at people in the near term. I've never seen anything like this in my life, and I've been dealing with affordable housing issues since the early 80s in this community. So
I would second that. Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the rear here, and I know I'm watching the clock. So let me try to get these in real quick. So, and I understand the city's desire to attract more landlords. I get that point. And respect to Maggie's point in regards to problem tenants, I am concerned about a comment I think Mary Ann made about some outside questions that were made by some managers or administrative people for certain properties, totally unrelated to the rent. Because it kind of reminds me of questions that people will ask you that it's really none of their business, so to speak, if you will. Like, how are you going to be able to afford soap, and how you going to be able to get clothes washed, that kind of thing. So with that, let me ask just real quick in regards to city staff. Is there anything currently existing in that regard that's, I don't want to say illegal, but deterrent towards landlords to be asking questions outside of the rent itself? Maybe not.
Yeah, Mike, I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well, like, okay, let's say I've got Section 8 voucher. I go to an apartment, and they go, well, okay, you got Section 8. And the next question is, or curiosity is, well, how do you get around? Well, how do you eat? Where do you get your bus fare from? Those kind of questions.
I can answer that a little bit.
Okay.
This is Olga.
Well, I'd like to answer it. Since my name was brought up, and Mark, you completely did not get what I was saying. And Mike, it wasn't about landlords asking those questions. It was about a discussion I was having with a landlord who was talking to me about those things. And I thought that was pretty clear.
Okay. All right. Then maybe I misunderstood. It's just that it reminded me of some other situations that I've experienced, let's just say. Real quick to Laura Sharp, if you can answer this. Are you still working on the websites? I know there were some updates coming.
The website for the source of income?
Well, we were talking about accessibility a while ago.
Yeah, so that's still in process.
Okay. And I think that's it. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, so I think this has been a great discussion. The request from HCD was if we want to vote in support of an ordinance like this to mayor and council. So I'd just like to put that out there. What is the general feeling? Does somebody want to make a motion?
This is Lori. I'll make a motion.
Okay, so the motion is that HCD has reviewed the source of income ordinance and it has our support.
Yes, thank you for stating it clearly.
Okay. Ann, is that what you were looking for?
So sorry, Neto was the one that agendized this. I think it's entirely up to you if you'd want to. That sounds like take a position. Entirely up to you all.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Who was that? Is that Jay?
No, it was Mike.
Mike. Okay, so it was a motion made by Lori and seconded by Mike. Is there any further discussions before we put it to vote?
So just to be clear, what we're saying is that the commission has reviewed the ordinance and that we support it and are asking mayor and council to vote for it. Vote yay. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Michael Edmonds.
Aye.
Olga Flores.
Aye.
Sharia Jimenez.
Aye.
Liz Wilson.
Aye.
Jay Young.
Aye.
Mindy Bernstein. Did Mindy leave? No.
Yes, she did.
She did. Okay. Lori Miserbo.
Aye.
Joanna Carr.
Aye.
Maggie Amato Tejas.
Aye.
Wendy left. Marianne Bierling.
Aye.
Mark Clark.
Aye.
And Vicky Cusino.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it. So Ann, do we need to send a letter? Would that be the best thing to do, or can we communicate through meeting minutes, or how do you recommend we do that?
You can do either. I think a letter makes it pretty clear. So I can work with our staff to get that from you.
So we're not going to have, are we going to have another meeting before it goes to vote?
At the current timeline, you will have another meeting in September.
So it's the best, probably the best thing for us to do is draft a letter. Then do we need to get everyone's approval again if it basically just says what we went through? I don't think we do.
If you're just referencing the motion, I don't, but I think given you have a month, you can put together a draft for review ahead of next month.
Okay, is that what everybody wants me to do? All right. Okay, great, thank you. So our next agenda item is agenda item number 6, discussion about housing equity and related issues. So Jay, did you want to lead this discussion?
Well, why don't I just, I can give a little bit of background here. One of the things that I know that I have heard, at least in the Housing Segregation Subcommittee and from others, is that oftentimes, I mean, obviously present meeting excluded, but we often don't have time to discuss other related equity issues. I mean, I just heard Mary Ann brought up an issue that, she would like to discuss. So I just think it's important for us to have a time carved out every meeting for us to discuss various issues that maybe are on our radar, other things that we need to discuss. So I'm not intending to lead this, but I did ask to have this put on here. And maybe first off, we can just see if this is something that the rest of the group thinks that we need to have on our meeting agenda so that we do have time and space to talk about issues or not. So that was the idea there, and I'll just, I guess, open it up from there.
So I'm okay either way. I think we could handle this as a part of the subcommittee update, maybe give it some more time, or we could continue to handle it as a separate agenda item. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I think last time we were talking, the main discussion was trying to do an equity study, and how do we move that forward? So I think, is that your recollection as well?
I think that was kind of the last thing that maybe we talked about, at least from the segregation subcommittee, that we brought to the full committee, that at least as I recall, the full committee wanted maybe to discuss a little bit further what that means, what it looks like. And I can actually add a little bit to that. I see Mark has his hand up.
Mark?
I just had a question about whether I think having time to make some, have some substantive conversation is a great idea. The question I would have is whether we can do that in the context of an open meeting and an agenda, and whether we'd have to have the specific items agendized, the specific topics agendized ahead of time. And I kind of think we probably would have to, but that's a question that I just would raise.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, sorry, can I don't
Yeah,
know.
go ahead, Shay.
I'm wondering if there's a way we could be, I really like the idea of us having this kind of as a standing topic every meeting, because this is what we're supposed to be focused on, and it is kind of abstract. And so I don't know, but maybe there is a way, like you're saying, Mark, that we could be more specific about it. Like maybe maybe it's a different equity topic every meeting with the specific topic that someone's going to present on, and then possible policy solutions, because what we really can do here in the meeting has to be related to policy. So I don't know, maybe there's a way we can make it very, very clear and succinct, and maybe it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but we could have different presenters maybe, or I don't know, maybe there's some way to kind of formalize it and make it very useful for all of us in discussion and our knowledge, but also feel like we're able to, because I feel like every meeting we touch on so many different topics and we never get to go back around and revisit, you know, things like just Section 8, right? Maybe has its own, you know, or just the concept of public housing and what that means for Tucson. And, you know, I don't know, maybe it could be even more specific than that. Maybe there's a specific issue within Section 8 housing that we need to further discuss in detail.
Vicky?
Yeah, I like what Shay was just suggesting, because we jump all over with all these topics and just touch on them, and maybe this would be a way that we could actually spend more time on the various issues of equity. I just think we should try to explore that.
You know, I'm running from memory here a little bit because I couldn't find my notes from our last meeting. But I think what I recall was we wanted to do a housing equity study and make a recommendation to mayor and council that that HCD lead a housing equity study in conjunction with I forgot her name, the new equity department. So is that something that we want to try to flush out now, or Jay?
Yeah,
thank you.
I've got two things. One related to what this particular agenda item could potentially be, and then the second thing about an equity study. So, you know, one of the things potentially that we could do is have this be kind of like a parking lot. I mean, you know, again, I think that this meeting is a really good example of, you know, like folks were saying, we touched on a lot of different topics that I think oftentimes we want to get back to or talk more about, or, you know, see how they relate to what's happening in Tucson or not happening in Tucson. And maybe as we work our way through our meetings and our normal agenda, as things come up that pique our interest, somebody could take a note and kind of put that in a parking lot that we're able to discuss during this time, if we have time. Again, you know, to Mark's point, I don't know if that's, you know, if that's kosher, but certainly something that we could do. To the equity study, I do actually have something to share. So a professor at ASU, Deirdre Pfeiffer, I don't know if y'all are familiar with her. She is a longtime friend of mine and currently serves on the board of the Southwest Fair Housing Council. And she approached me about potentially having a class work with Southwest Fair Housing Council. And one of the things that I came up with and have since, I believe, talked to you, Jim, and Anne, I'm not sure who else, but there's a group of Deirdre students who will be starting just in a couple of weeks, the upcoming semester, who could help kind of lay the foundation for an equity study, because I know that, you know, this is true for me, and I think it's true for a lot of us. We don't know exactly what that would look like. I did share some resources with the group of some examples, but anyway, this class, Deirdre has outlined, she and I working together, some things that the students could do for an equity study. I could share my screen, or I can also just kind of read it off of a Word document. But what the students could do is potentially support efforts to create a housing equity study in Tucson, and the potential tasks could be synthesize existing knowledge related to housing equity in Tucson from existing scholarship, media, and possibly key informant interviews, conduct a peer community analysis of how other cities define, measure, represent, and track progress toward housing equity, and use this information to advance housing equity with attention to process as well as outcomes, and then develop a menu of options for Tucson. So it would essentially lay the groundwork and help us understand what other cities have done, kind of how other communities are looking at equity and how they're measuring it and taking action to make their cities more equitable, particularly as it relates to housing. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I hope that we can take advantage of it. So I'll leave it at that and field any questions that y'all may have, but that's kind of where that stands at this point.
Maggie?
And yeah, so yes, I agree. We've talked about so many things. It would be nice to kind of do a deeper dive. But like today, I think this was a great conversation on Section 8. But there have been other things that we've just kind of not talked about a lot. And we are affordable homeownership people. We do affordable rentals. So, we see a humongous issue, obviously, with a lack of, just the lack of housing, period. But home ownership is what builds wealth, and so I think that we also need to really we have so many smart people on this commission. I'm just thinking, we would have some great conversations, and I would like, I've had conversations with other members of this commission, and I think that we should try to. It's a huge issue, and it's not easily tackled, but maybe more solutions-based types of discussions, like how do we do this? I've mentioned in the past, I've been saying, well, we have housing. How do we convert that housing into affordable housing? Maybe it's naive, I don't know, but I do think that we need to talk about home ownership, and also the issue that's come up with the work that Shay and the Land Trust does around ADUs. The educating community on the importance of everywhere we turn around of increasing the density. I don't really know much about condos, but can we do affordable condos? What are the drawbacks? Can we start discussing these types of development projects that can perhaps create more units? I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking home ownership is something that I would like to discuss a little bit more, as far as, equity, as far as how do we get more, how do we build more? We need to build the scale. Most of the nonprofit agencies in town who do affordable housing do 5, 10 units. That's not enough. How do we help these agencies, community to, build more and to scale that up a little bit? So that's it. Thank you.
Maggie? Or you just, no. You just talked, sorry.
That's it, sorry, yeah.
Any other comments? So I guess I would like to go back to what Jay was talking about with the ASU professor and having ASU. I don't see a downside to that. What needs to happen to do that? I think that's a great idea. And any additional information we can get is going to be helpful.
Jim, to answer your question, I think that the commission can kind of be as involved as it would like to be. I mean, I'm happy to be the point person, obviously, since I've been working on this with Deirdre, but it would be great for the students to be able to engage with us, to understand where we're coming from, what we're looking for, what we do and don't know. So I think the students will get a lot of benefit, obviously, as well, understanding from the real world that we all work and live in, what the issues are and how to address them. So specifically, I guess I'm not sure at this point. I'm certainly open to suggestions. I could certainly, take comments and things from the group and relay them, or, if a small group of y'all wants to, be involved and engage with the students more regularly, I'm open to that as well. So I'm really kind of open to anything and certainly welcome suggestions as to,
So-
what can be efficient and productive for the group.
I guess, I mean, I'd be open to having, if you want her to attend the next commission meeting, Deirdre, we could have her attend and kind of talk about it and the process and the outcomes. If that's something you would prefer to handle in the subcommittee meeting, I'm okay with that as well. But I think my personal feeling is like I said, I don't see a downside to doing something like that. So I guess if you want to have a conversation with her and see if she wants to attend our next meeting and we can continue that, is everybody in general support of that? Anybody who's not? Joe?
My question was just going to be, as Jay talked about small groups, since the idea for a survey study came from Housing Segregation Subcommittee, is that the place where more of this work and interaction would live, or do you want to have it be with the CHD and in these meetings as a whole?
I mean, I'm happy to lead it in the subcommittee if that is what works for folks and folks trust me to do that. But if not, we could certainly put a placeholder on the agenda as well. If folks want to have more comment, I mean, people can reach out to me individually, I guess, as well. I guess as long as everybody doesn't do it all at once and it makes us have a committee meeting, right? We can talk offline a little bit.
Gotcha. My other comment was kind of to tie a couple things together when we were talking about solutions. I think when we talked about the study in Housing Segregation Subcommittee, a lot of that was around the fact that we pretty much know that there are issues around things like appraisal and assessment bias, lending discrimination, stuff like that we hear stories about. We get all these anecdotes locally and nationwide. We want to know how much of an issue they are to Tucson and how this is affecting Tucsonans. And hopefully that study can also look at what other places are doing to counter those things, so we can prioritize those solutions and have those solutions built in. We get the study, we say, okay, this is a big issue. Here are the best practices for countering that, and move forward with those. So that's why I really liked the idea of the study. Thanks.
Hey Jay, what is Deirdre's last name again?
Pfeiffer.
How do you spell that?
Such a good question. I forget every time. Like Pfeiffer. I might have actually just spelled it right.
Okay.
To Joe's point though, too, I also want to be clear that, I think what this group of students would do would give us the knowledge that we need as a commission to then make a recommendation about what a study would look like, what it would do, and what it should contain. It's not actually going to be the study. It's going to be more of like a survey of what other communities are doing. Again, that would give us the knowledge to do what we thought was necessary as a commission, or what we wanted to recommend be done. If that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Well, any other final comments?
I was also just going to ask real quick what Anne and others at HCD thought about this idea, and how HCD could potentially engage and maybe pick up the ball after the students potentially put something together.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'd say we're really excited and grateful that you're putting this together, and we're here to be involved and connect with Maurice Walker as well, and supporting that. So thank you.
Shay?
Yeah, I guess I just like I guess I support this. I think we should do more of a deep dive into this topic in general. But I guess I also still really, what I crave is conversation. I mean, we're here in a room with a bunch of people who have so much diversity in their backgrounds and experiences and takes on affordable housing. And I feel like, and maybe even too is a better way to engage the public. I just feel like there's so many topics that we still, as of yet, a year in, haven't been able to even even open the door on the conversation, like gentrification, right? Like that's a huge one. That's a huge topic that no one wants to take on because it's like super messy and complicated. But I've never ever once had to have the conversation with anyone here in the room. And that's why I still feel like it would be really, for me, could be very helpful to have some of these, especially as we see people mobilizing and out there in the public who maybe also aren't as familiar with this whole world, right, of affordable housing, that we might have a place to discuss topics just more conversationally and in a way that we feel like I don't know, there's just something more I'm craving out of this format that I think, Jay, I'm on the same page with you, but I don't know how to make it a topic or some way to that we can kind of hash things out really quickly without having to, just in a conversational way, without having to go in an academic route, that I think would be really helpful to have something like that every meeting. And call to the audience doesn't seem to be stimulating that. So maybe if it was topic-based, people would be more willing to come and share and ask questions and just learn.
Jay, do you want an agenda item on gentrification?
I don't know that I want that. I really don't.
Okay.
But I would love the opportunity for us to, like we're saying, if there's a topic we need to revisit and just have the conversation and like, what do you think works? What do you think doesn't work? Like realistically, like, and a lot of this to me comes down to money. It's like, you can have all the great ideas in the world, but how are we going to pay for it? Like, right? Like how do you pay for it? How do you pay for public housing? How do you pay for all these great things? Like, I don't know.
Betty?
I'm really disappointed that every time home ownership comes up, nobody says anything. I feel that that's an equity problem because no one wants to talk about it. Nobody here. I've asked planning to get a list of, what's in the pipeline as far as projects, development projects, and we never got that. My concern is all these developments are going up somewhere. You see a lot of construction everywhere, but we don't really know what it is until we see it in the newspaper. And by then it's too late for us to really engage in any of it. And I think, I talked about this before, the rent to the leasing versus buying these subdivisions. They're popping up all over the place. I don't know if they're popping up in the city, but in the outlying areas they are. And they're asking for 3 times the rent. And we talk about, sources of income. Who has 3 times the rent, and how and what types of policies can we put in place to prevent some of that from happening, or at least having them be more inclusive to these types of projects. Those are things that maybe it's not home ownership, but it's the closest thing when you're renting a single family in a single family subdivision, and it's in a community as if you were buying. There's so many things that we've brought up about home ownership, and no one speaks up. I would like to know who on this Zoom is even interested in home ownership. And if you're not, it's okay. It's okay. But those of us that are, maybe we need to have our own separate meetings and really brainstorm about what can we do now? Because yes, it's not a good time to buy a home right now. We know that, but let's prepare. We know it's going to change. We know that the interest rates are either going to stabilize or come down again eventually. So what do we do now to prepare for that future? we're not doing anything right now. All we're doing is reacting to what's happening at the moment with rents. And I think we're being short-sighted.
So I just sent you an email, Betty. Let's talk about how we can incorporate this going forward. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, Jay.
Just real quick, I know we're short on time. So there are at least 3 things that I've heard today that could be agendized if we're concerned about this having agenda items. One is gentrification and displacement. The other one is home ownership. And I believe, Marianne, you mentioned a discussion about the seriously mentally ill and how they're being incorporated into housing. And I don't remember exactly what that topic was, but something along those lines. So those are 3 things that we could talk about during this time at our next meeting.
Liz?
Yeah, I think that it's great to prioritize people who are able to access homeownership or who are on the precipice of being able to access it if a recession is in fact not going to happen. In the same regard, I do think that it's important that we prioritize renting. Renting is the best way to keep people out of homelessness. And I think it would be great if we could itemize like some specific things that we would like to address regarding renting. Another thing is not only talking about people with serious mental illnesses, but disability overall, I think is necessary. The accessibility of units in our communities, as well as barriers to people even getting inside of those units, such as the difficulty of the Section 8 application and the processes that follow thereafter. Most people have like an 8th grade reading level for medical literature. If you need a JD to read what you're going to be entering into with housing, I think that means that it's pretty exclusionary. So opportunities to make things more accessible for everyone.
Marianne?
I just really appreciate what was just said about home ownership by Betty and also Maggie. And you know, we have an affordable housing subcommittee. This should be on our agenda because what they're talking about is affordable housing. It's just not rental, and low income people who can get into home ownership and increase their assets and their economic mobility, you know, open up units for other people. So I think on the Affordable Housing Committee, that home ownership should be on the agenda on a regular basis.
Olga? Did we lose Olga? I think we did. Okay, Joe.
About that. I just want to say, I want to just say ditto to Marianne. I think that we do need either, and to Betty, like either we need our own committee or we need to add an agenda item for home ownership. I've tried to bring it up in the past multiple times, but I don't know if there's enough people that know enough about it, I think, at least that had enough interest in it in the beginning. So if we can either add another committee, if we can't spend enough time on the agenda for it in the Affordable Housing Committee. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Okay, any final comments before we go to our final agenda item? Okay, well, I think that was a good discussion, and I've heard you guys, so I'll do my best to get these things on the agenda going forward. Okay, so agenda item number 7 is HCD updates. And you want to?
Yeah, I know it's 6, so I'll just mention one quick one. I put in the chat a link to a job posting that HCD just posted. It is for our Thrive expansion effort. That's the East 29th Street 22nd Street, Golf Links, Alvernon, Craycroft, Thrive project. We will be hiring a project coordinator to be the liaison between HCD and organizations, residents, folks in that area. So, you know, we're dreaming of having someone who's interested in community organizing and engagement and equity, and ideally, I mean, has some sort of interest, has some sort of connection to the area, but we're looking to try to hire somebody. It is grant funded. We know of at least 3 years funding, and we're really searching for a 4th year as we're considering this a 4-year program. So please, please, please spread to your networks. This is a position that we really think is important. Many of you know Allison, who's back, and that's exciting for me. Allison was our coordinator for the Thrive and O5 area. So just that position is critical to the success of the program. So please spread to your networks. That's all.
Thank you. And I'm gonna just quickly, we've got some good news. I'm gonna let Corin give you the good news.
Hi, everyone. And yes, realize we're short on time, so I'll be brief as well, but some updates on zoning changes related to affordable housing. So the good news, as Jim mentioned, is that Mayor and Council last month voted to expand eligibility for the individual parking plan, which is a tool to reduce parking requirements to affordable housing. So affordable housing developments can now qualify for that parking reduction should they choose to. So that's great. And this commission was very supportive. So thank you everyone for sending comments in support of that to Mayor and Council. The other item that I know relates to just housing affordability in general is new requirements for electric vehicle infrastructure at multifamily developments and other commercial sites, office, retail, etc. That was also on the agenda July 12th, the Mayor and Council agenda, but was continued to allow for some further dialogue. So there's still some opportunity to provide input there. There's a meeting next Friday. So if anyone's interested, just contact me. Many of you have been involved in those conversations and got an invitation, but if you're interested, just let me know. And then one final thing I want to mention is related to accessory dwelling units, casitas. As you know, we changed the zoning last year to allow these across the city. We just adopted some building code policy changes to make it a little easier and less costly to build casitas. So those just got formally adopted, basically allowing flexibility around utilities and also some other building code aspects. I'll put information about that in the chat. So that's something that was kind of causing some snags with casitas that we heard about. So that has been changed to make it, again, just a little easier to build casitas. So that's what's going on with zoning as it relates to housing.
That's great. Thank you. Any comments or questions for HCD? Ray, do you have a question or?
I just had a comment about the focus on home ownership, and just wanted to ensure that as part of that conversation that collective home ownership, such as resident-owned communities, is included in that conversation, especially in a city like Tucson that has 10% of our housing stock as manufactured housing. Resident-owned manufactured housing parks, on average, people are only putting $1,000 down to be owners and then paying that loan back in their monthly fees. I think it's an important part of the home ownership conversation is how to make collective home ownership more accessible. And to put in a tiny plug, and I'll drop this in the chat, is the Tucson Alliance for Housing Justice is going to be teaching an allyship and ownership course. If you all know of any small property owners, progressive landlords who might be interested in how to be landlords in a more just way, we'll be teaching a class on that. So we'll drop that in the chat.
Thank you. Okay. Well, a good meeting. Our next meeting is going to be on September 1st at 4 p.m. I'd like to see all the subcommittees meet before then. And with that, it is 6:06. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.